he thinks we should have. All right, we're going to get started. Hi, Wayne. Thank you. So our final session of the day focuses on the role of technology and media in early childhood, and certainly in the spirit of what has turned out to be a day of cross-cutting themes and issues. This has already come up a little bit, particularly in Kathy Hirsch-Pasek's talk. Michael Rich, the director of the Center on Media and Child Health at Boston Children's Hospital, is our plenary speaker, who is only fittingly showing up on video rather than in person. So Michael was here, taped a very engaging and even at times provocative 30-minute plenary. Joe Blatt, colleague here at the faculty on the faculty at the Graduate School of Education, who directs our technology innovation and education program and does a lot of work with Sesame Street, is going to respond, followed by Wayne YSAGUIRRE, the president and CEO of Nurtury Boston, which has one new site, the Bromley Heath site, that has a partnership with WGBH. Michael Rich's two collaborators, Christelle Lavallee and Lauren Rubensall, are also here. All four will then come up for a Q&A. So we're going to start with Michael Rich's video and go from there. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I think it's appropriate that the person talking on media and technology should not even appear in real life, but appear virtually too. So I apologize for not being here, but I think it's right consonant with what we're doing here. I want to talk today about using technology in wise ways with very young children, teaching very young children. And I think that to start, we have to recognize that there's a generational divide here. Even those of you who are part of the millennials or the Y generation are going to be very different, are already very different than the children you'll be teaching in early childhood. And we are teaching digital natives, and many times we're teaching them either by digital immigrants or from research and experience garnered by digital immigrants. And one of the things that I've observed time and again with educational technology is there tends to be a bimodal distribution in a reflexive response among educators. And that is, some of them blindly embrace it. Hey, look, it's bright, it makes noise. How cool is that? What a great teaching tool. And some blindly run away from it. But what we need to do is move from these reflexive responses one way or the other and really get in the middle, where many of us actually are, and understand how we can use these tools with evidence-based strategies to teach kids well. Part of this is I think we have to confront our own preconceptions about technology and media. So what is happening here? Are these kids learning, or are they falling behind? Or possibly both, depending on how it's used. One of the things that we have to realize is that when we're using technology with early childhood education, pre-K, is these kids are already really media exposed by the time they get to us at age 3. They've been using media since the very beginning. So let's look at the most common screen that is still used among kids, which is television. Despite all the screens we now have in our lives, television is still the most used screen. And why is that? It's because essentially 100% of American homes have televisions in them. These are data that were collected in 2010, so they're already pretty old, but I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that everybody has a television in their house. But more homes in America had 7 or more TVs than had 1. 45% say the TV was on all or almost all the time that someone was at home and awake. 63% have it on during meals. And 75% of kids in the first year of life watch TV or DVDs for almost 2 hours a day, as compared to 23 minutes being read to. And those kids who are not cared for in the home have a very varied screen time. In other words, kids who are in real preschools, who are in accredited daycare centers, are getting about 3.2 hours of screen time a day. That's compared to kids who are all the way up to 5.5 hours a day in home-based childcare. So what is happening now with the rise of the interactive device, the smartphone, the tablet? Between 2011 and 2013, access in homes with children under the age of 5 increased from 52% to 75%. Children of this age group are using mobile devices 72% of the time at the end of that 2-year period. It almost doubled. And kids under 2 use a mobile device 38% of the time, almost quadrupling from just 2 years before. So the question is also, do children learn differently on mobile devices, on interactive devices, than they do on televisions? One of the studies that we did at the Center on Media and Child Health a few years back was looking at the question of whether this, which was the most popular baby shower gift of its time, $800 million a year were spent by parents on making sure that their children grew up to be Nobel Prize winners, to see whether they actually learned from television. And we looked at 700 children from birth to age 3, looked at their screen time exposure, and then looked at what their visual and verbal IQs were at age 3. And interestingly enough, what we found was those kids who had greater screen time had actually lower IQs. But when we looked at other factors that we know go into development of intelligence, such as parents reading to the child, a parent at home, breastfeeding, and interactive talking with the parents, the independent effect of screens went away. So one of the things that we are thinking is that this may not be a problem in and of itself, but may be a marker for a whole host of choices that parents are making around their parenting in terms of what their role is in terms of educating and raising their child. And so I think that what we're seeing is that these screens, when used as the electronic babysitter, are not as good as what they're likely displacing, which is a parent interacting or reading or even just looking out the window at nature. One of the things that we've seen over the last 30 years is that from a television screen, a passive receptive screen, no significant learning actually occurs under the age of about 30 months, and that's been reproduced a number of times. But once they hit that 30-month cusp, what do they learn? One of my early mentors was right here. Jerry Lesser was one of my mentors early on. And he was one of the creators of Sesame Street, which now has more than a generation of experience in educational television. And what's interesting is when you look at kids who are watching educational television, Sesame Street in this case, at the ages of 3 to 5, which is the developmental sweet spot that it's designed for, when you compare them to kids who watch entertainment TV or watch no TV, they actually show up at school more ready to learn. They have more pre-reading and pre-math skills, and most robustly, they're more pro-social. They live in a more diverse and tolerant world. If you think about it, Sesame Street is a pretty diverse and tolerant place. Interestingly, we now have, because of this generation of experience, we can now look at these kids essentially a generation later and look at them as high school seniors. At high school seniors, the same kids were less aggressive, they placed more value on their achievement, they read more, they had higher grades, and they were more creative. Again, I will give you the caveat, though. This is not a Sesame Street effect. Sesame Street did not cause this, but the parent who chooses to put their 3 to 5-year-old in front of Sesame Street as opposed to, say, Power Rangers, was making a whole host of choices around their parenting that led to this outcome. And they're not all watching Sesame Street. I'm going to show you a video of an experiment that was done in a preschool by a colleague of ours in Minnesota, where he put the kids in front of the two most popular kids shows of the time.
We took our cameras to a local daycare site, hid the cameras, and filmed the kids watching current shows of Barney and then Power Rangers. The kids reacted to Barney with,
I said everybody like Barney. Sitting on the table, my blanket feels so soft like a big marshmallow.
And which color do you like best?
I like red. I like
one little boy was especially enjoying the show. Watch how the kids interact once the show is over. They use the maracas to make music. After watching the Power Rangers, the change was immediate and overwhelming. While some kids exploded, others were transfixed, clearly identifying with different characters. The Power Ranger message of beating someone up for a good cause was lost. The group disintegrated. Remember, here are the kids with Barney.
Oh, and what else do I see?
Here are the kids with Power Rangers. What had been instruments after Barney were now weapons. Even the boy who was on the sidelines enthusiastically joins in the group mayhem.
Well, my son was one of the ones that was sitting quietly throughout the whole thing, and now he's bouncing around, hitting people, and, just acting crazy.
I think what this shows us is, that, as we all know, preschoolers are pretty much barbarians, and part of what they're there to learn is how to be a member of a society, how to get civilized. But from an experimental or research point of view, they're a very interesting group to work with because they are what they are. They're very honest. They're very straight up about how they're affected by the content of what they're exposed to. Same medium, same technology, same kids, same delivery system, different outcomes. So let's move on to the tablets, to the interactive media. And one of the things that's very interesting is we've all seen the doting parent who brings out the iPad and puts it in front of their baby and says, "Look how smart my baby is. She can do an iPad." The reality is that virtually every baby can do an iPad. What that proves is how smart Steve Jobs was. They are very adept with tablets. In fact, so adept that they are better at them in some ways than they are with so-called old technology. I'm done with that technology. I'm out of here. But even though they're very good at and very facile with the tool itself, are they actually learning? I'd be very interested to see your observations to the following little clip of a kid who's also very good with a tablet.
Why don't you show us the stamp, like the car stamp or motorcycle stamp?
Okay. You want a dolphin, okay?
You want to find a dolphin?
Yeah.
Okay, you think there is one in there?
Yeah.
Hopefully. Ooh, there's some other animals. Why don't you pick another animal?
Dinosaur.
Ooh, yeah, do the dinosaur.
Is it dinosaur color?
Whoa, nice. Now draw a picture.
Okay.
Do you like being two? Whoa. That is awesome, Bridger.
What struck me most about this was not how good the kid was with the iPad, but how undeveloped his language skills were. Think about it, he's a 2-year-old. Most 2-year-olds are much more articulate than that, both in terms of just the motor capability to form words, but also in terms of having full sentences, using more complex vocabulary. So one of the things as we approach this question of the interface between technology, screen media, and teaching kids who are in this preschool age group is let's step back and look at the key tasks, the key developmental tasks of this age group. The first is they are developing language skills. Rapid development, in fact, going from 50 to 110 words to well over 2,000 words in the space of 2 years or so. Their physical development is changing dramatically. Remember, at 3, you're still a toddler, which means that you don't even walk that well. You toddle. And they're working on their gross motor skills. They're working on their fine motor skills. Drawing with a pencil is much harder than taking your finger to an iPad. Although I still haven't figured out how to sign my name with my finger, which I'm having to do more and more. But they're working on coordination, they're working on balance, they're working on learning to run. And we have to think about the fact, particularly, that kids of this age need to move. They cannot sit still for hours on end learning. They have to get up and move around, as well as develop those skills. They're, most importantly, perhaps, developing their social skills, learning how to move from parallel play into working with others, into sharing, into taking turns, into making compromises, and understanding the feelings of others, empathy. And finally, they are building their critical thinking. So what they're learning to do is, instead of sort of accepting everything as it's given to them, the way an infant does, they're asking and answering open-ended kind of questions. They're problem solving. They're imagining worlds and dress-ups, just like that little girl who just wanted to play dress-up instead of beat each other senseless. And they are able to project what will happen next. If I do this, what will likely happen? So let's look at how these tools interface with these tasks. Language skills, one of the things that we discovered actually in the educational TV world is that just teaching kids their ABCs isn't good enough. What you needed to do is ask them to respond to what's on the screen. This was before we had interactive tablets or games, but Dora the Explorer, Blue's Clues, these shows, you respond to it. Even though it was a passive device, the kids would just answer when a question was asked. And kids who watch those kind of shows between the ages of 3 to 7 demonstrated significant improvement with apps or with those kind of shows. 2 weeks with the Super Y app, which is PBS Kids, 3-year-olds showed a 17% increase in their vocabulary score. 4-year-olds, 9%, and 5-year-olds, 8%. So in a sense, the greatest yields were with the youngest kids who actually had farther to go. And as we got older and older, less and less was found. How about physical development? Well, interestingly enough, there is virtually no research on kids of this age group around media, screen media, even active video games and physical development, in part because the research is not only being done on older kids, but because it's largely around increasing physical activity to fight the obesity problem. So it's not around, can you use these games to develop coordination, to develop balance? Now, the Wii has, as some of you may know, a balance board, and you can actually control it with your weight and shifting your weight. The Kinect has the ability to use your body as a controller. So the capability is there, it just hasn't really been explored or researched yet. And I think that one of the things that we need to always take a step back and remember is that when we are using these technologies, we are not doing something else. And we have to always ask the question of, well, just because we can do it in this realm, is it really the best place to do it? Or would they do better going outside, and running around. Social skills. We find that technology, the screen media, are most effective when it facilitates social interaction and collaboration to problem solve. In other words, instead of it being one-on-one, the kid, with the computer or the tablet or the television, to encourage the child to work with a teacher, to work with a peer, to actually try to work together to solve the problems. When you work in pairs, they're the best for modeling and teaching. Solo work does not work well with any kid up until they're up into the adolescent years. But that working in pairs works especially effectively, and solo work is almost useless in this age group. Computers, per se, the laptop or the desktop, are very challenging for kids, and that's for a couple of reasons. Number one is the mouse and the touchpad are pretty challenging, are hard to use because of their fine motor skills that they have not yet developed. But the other thing that they do is that most computer environments are single screen and single input. Only one person can sit in front of that keypad. Only one person can hold the mouse. Tablets are different. Kids of this age also are very much looking for contingent responses from their teachers, from their peers, etc. If I do this, what will happen? If I ask that, what will happen? And computers are not good with that, and kids know it, and they don't seek help from computers. They don't ask questions. Even if the software is set up to do it, they don't have the instinct to do it. They're sort of focused in, and they get frustrated very, very easily. Tablets, on the other hand, and touchscreen devices offer a much more intuitive interface. This is why everybody's baby can do an iPad. You touch it, it does something. You touch the picture of the cow, it makes a moo. You run your finger over it, and all of a sudden you get a streak of color behind it. And they're very easily learned. Not only that, but the kids don't get frustrated or bored with them. So even if they make a mistake, if they don't do it right the first time, they stay engaged and they stay working with it because at least it's responding to them in some way, and they figure it out. Kids don't, of any age really, don't read the owner's manual before they pick up technology. They just do it, and this is a great example of how it's done very well, how it's designed very well for kids to stay with it. This is a single screen, but it's multiple inputs. So 2 or 3 kids can gather around it, a teacher with a child, a teacher with a couple of kids, and make things happen so you can share it, so you can essentially compete or collaborate in that space together. It's important in this setting, though, that the teacher provides a clear learning goal and scaffolds what they're learning, so that you're not just having fun with it, just making it make colors or make sounds or do things, but you're actually saying, here's what we're in this space to do, here's how we're using it. And their interaction with the child, their actions on the device are all aimed towards scaffolding that learning behavior. And so here's a great example of kids with an iPad and playing with it. They have fun with it, they enjoy it, and they don't even notice they're learning half of the time, which is the best part of it. And how about critical thinking? The interactive, as we talked about with Blue's Clues and Dora, interactive call and response type of TV exposure for 2 years showed measurable gains in problem solving, in perception, in critical thinking, and nonverbal skills among 3-year-olds. Not only that, but the caregivers observing them saw more flexible thinking, more problem-solving skills, and more social behavior when that had that interactive play to it. What is found is that you need to blend that interactivity with new and challenging material, but to do it in a repeated, recurrent kind of setting that is easily mastered. So that's why Sesame Street always looks the same, even though they're dealing with different information, sometimes bringing in new characters, but the kids feel familiar with it. They feel that they've mastered it. They feel that it's their street, and they're able to take on this new material but in a position of mastery and comfort. So I want to show you an example of an attempt to blend all of these four things, all of these into a single device that can be, as you will see, used in pairs, in groups, or with the teacher, but also on their own to explore.
We designed Scratch Junior to match developmental abilities of young children. We look at cognitive, social, personal capabilities, and we design the features of Scratch Junior to match what young children can do. We work with teachers, we work with children, we work with parents, and we observe what they were able to do, what they were not able to do, and we went back and redesigned Scratch Junior many times so it can really be a tool for young children.
Being a teacher in an inclusive classroom, we have such differentiated needs. So this idea that there's an entry point for all the different kids in my class, regardless of where they're at with their learning, there's some way that they can get into it and start playing around and start learning how to create things, that there's a point of entry for everybody in my class.
So this is an example of technology that was designed from the ground up to meet those kind of learning needs, that allowed the child to create. This is basically a video game creation tool. And there are those that are already saying coding is the new literacy, that we've got to learn coding right from the get-go. And these kids are coding in preschool in very simple, ways, but they're still coding. So what it all comes down to is, to meet all these goals, I kind of have boiled it down to the 3 C's. We have to be conscious of the content. For a child, every moment is a teachable moment, so they're always learning. And that content that you put in front of them, they will learn. Remember, they are filling up an empty library of life experience at this point. And so if we put them in front of, say, Power Rangers, they're going to learn one set of things. And if we put them in front of Barney, they're going to learn another set of things. And we cannot continue to delude ourselves to think that we're not changed by the media we use and the media we're exposed to. Context is really essential. The difference between putting a kid in front of a television and walking away, or sitting beside that child and talking with the child, asking questions, doing dialogic talk around what's going on, is really, really essential. And this is where context sort of goes between the home and the school. And I think that while it is our tendency to say, well, we're going to control really well what's happening in the school, we have to understand that for the child, it's a seamless experience back and forth between school. And I think it's really important to engage parents in that process so that we understand what is going on in the homes, when the kids go out of school. What is going on? How are media being used? What are the kids being exposed to content-wise, but also in terms of how it's used and how they build on it for this child's building life experience. And finally, connectedness is essential. If there's any one of these 4 things that are learned, it's probably the social skills that are most important. We don't use a whole lot of the didactic information that we learn in preschool now, but we do learn how to get along with each other. We do learn how to make things happen, how to problem solve. We learn how to think and how to be a society. And so one of the real dangers, of course, with media is that it's easy to become isolated. It's easy to become off in that zone of, whatever the tablet or the television or the social media is giving you. And we see that in all age groups. And part of what we're doing in this stage of life is teaching the kids how to be, And if we are in front of screens all the time, they're going to be in front of screens all the time. The number of parents who are sitting there doing the crackberry prayer and saying, turn off the TV, stop playing that video game. We have to remember that kids hear about 1% of what we say and 100% of what we do. And this starts very early with them learning how to use these media. And part of the critical thinking piece is understanding that they are not the be-all and the end-all. They are not to fill our worlds. It's not, and they are not the default activity for life, but they are, in fact, tools that do some things remarkably well, but they don't do everything very well. And we have to put them in their place and remember that sometimes finger paint that you can smell and feel and put in your hair is way better than an iPad that does almost the same thing in a two-dimensional, flat, and relatively cold space. I also want to give space for the kids to be bored. I think it is really important that we have the space to explore our imaginations, to explore our creativity, to explore what's going on inside us and who us is, who I am. And I think that we have, because we have all this technology, we've gotten into the mode where most kids, on average, and our research shows it, are spending 28% of their 7 hours and 38 minutes on average using media actively every day. Multitasking, using 2 or more media at the same time. So they're exposed to 10 hours and 45 minutes of content. We don't allow ourselves to just take a breath, to breathe. And one of the, I think, the important lessons I want to leave you with is to remember that about 100 years ago, there was an extremely bored civil servant in Switzerland who used to walk to work beside the river and look at the eddies and swirls in the water and stamp a bunch of meaningless papers all day long, walk back home beside that river and go upstairs and write up a little thing called the theory of relativity. Late in life, when Einstein was asked, how did you come up with this theory that we've now spent 40, 50 years to try to disprove, and it hangs together and it explains everything? He said, it's because I was bored. Because I was bored, I could let my mind wander. And I think that we need to remember that anytime we're using these technologies, we are stimulating these kids. We are not giving them a chance to spread their wings intellectually and fly. So thank you for listening.
Great. Hi, I'm Joe Blatt. I'm a member of the faculty here. I've never before been in the position of responding to someone who's not here. And I usually think of myself as a fairly gentle person, but I realize this severe temptation to sort of start slashing and burning because he can't defend himself. But in fact, I'm not going to do that because I think Michael did a really nice job of pulling together themes of research from early childhood, from learning, and from media. And I also was really struck by how poised and comfortable he was talking on this stage, but to an empty hall. So if you would all just leave, I could, I'm sure, do a really nice presentation, but you'll have to bear with me struggling through. So I want to start with just a couple of quick points of context for thinking about media and technology in early childhood learning. First is, if you think you have problems, think about those of us who also try to work with tweens and teenagers. This is a benign form of wasting time. Fruit Ninja, you may know Angry Birds or other such games, which are simply just Twitch games. There's also Snapchat and the sort of whole social networking, social media challenge that tweens and teens are facing. And then, of course, in a more serious way, first-person shooter games like Call of Duty. So I think we ought to take a breath and realize that there are some really severe challenges at other stages of child development and learning with media and technology that we're not grappling with today, at least. Then I also want to say a little bit more about the fact that whenever we talk about educational media, it's easy to forget that we're not just talking about cognitive learning, but in fact using the National Research Council picture here of the importance of interpersonal and intrapersonal learning. In fact, there's really pretty good evidence that at all stages what you learn in those other two categories serves you better in the next stage of learning maybe than just the cognitive stuff. So that's an important contextual point. And then the third is that lots of the things that we would like to know more about to be able to say something useful and definitive about media and technology and young children, we don't know yet because these media are so new and multiplying so fast. You all know the time scale it takes to form a good research question, get funding, get access to kids to do your data collection, do the analysis and publish it. That's a long cycle, and a lot of what we'd like to know, we don't know yet. So that means you can sort of ignore the rest of what I say, but I'd prefer that you didn't. 3 points from television research, which I think are useful information going forward, even in this more highly interactive environment. The first is this question of long-term effect of early encounter with educational media. And I think that's one thing I would argue with Michael with. I think he sort of buried the lead, if you will, when he talked about how what matters really is it's the parent's choice that determines what the kid may see, which is, of course, not always true anymore. But more to the point, it does make a huge difference whether kids are feeding on Sesame Street and shows like that rather than on Power Rangers and shows like that because of things like modeling, which you saw, pardon me, which you saw well demonstrated in the classroom video there. But also because things like Dora and Miguel, I hope you know Dora the Explorer and Miguel shows, are setting the stage for modeling behaviors we'd really like kids to not only acquire, but then to profit from throughout their school career. So those differences that Michael just quickly pointed to are in fact huge differences in high school seniors in performance on grades and the number of books read, in social attitudes, peer acceptance, and so on. That correlates very highly with what you watched. So those of you who are old enough to remember the mantra from Marshall McLuhan about the medium is the message, that's very clearly wrong. The message is the message. The content is really what matters the most in these contexts. Okay, so then we try to take those lessons forward into the interactive media age and what I've called first responders. Folks who are trying, okay, we know something about media and technology and early learning, trying to bring that into the interactive tablet mobile world. And I'm just flashing through a couple of the sites and apps that are available. I didn't want to take the time to go to the actual, bring up the actual sites, but you should have a look. And you can see there's a huge range. Here's clearly something very commercial, trying to make sure that parent thinks they have to spend money to acquire a technology-based learning experience for their kid. Here's something a little gentler, Toca Boca, but still money involved. Then we move to things that are a little friendlier. This is Learn with Homer. This is Kindoma, which is a brand new site that I think has a lot of potential. And Sesame Street, I'm happy to say, is now active in this space with this new Sesame Go, which was either just released or certainly highly renovated. So these first responders are out there trying to take advantage of interactive technology, but it's a pretty confusing environment, very difficult for parents and daycare teachers and others to figure out what is actually any good, what's been tested, what is or is not research-based. So it's a difficult time. There are organizations trying to help with this, like Common Sense Media, that some of you may know where you can go to for peer ratings and so on, but it's still a difficult moment. Some of the challenges that I wanted to underline are trying to find the fit between learning goals and play behavior. And in that context, I would say that neither Barney nor Power Rangers is a really very strong example of what's possible here. Dora, on the other hand, is much stronger, right? Because you can have characters that kids can imitate and enjoy their ability to show off their Spanish learning and bring it into their play. A second challenge that we face is that it's these same devices that offer the Twitch games I showed, the more threatening stuff, and the learning stuff. And how do you really think about how to control where kids stay, where they spend their time? And then a third challenge is that all those things that have to do with networking and social media and so on, that we think about things like, do you really want a young kid online at all, given the kinds of things that they can inadvertently encounter if they stray from the game that you set up? On the other hand, it seems pretty clear that the social skills that go into online communication and collaboration need to be taught and start fairly early. Okay, I'm just going to keep rushing here because I know that Wayne and I are all that stand between you and your weekend, so I'm just going to zoom through these last points. I think that one of the interesting, Noni and Stephanie asked us to say a word about design and implementation challenges going forward. I think this is one of the most interesting ones. You've all seen older kids walking around with their friends on the street, but doing nothing but looking at their device. How are we going to think about integrating the screen and the world? My own work is somewhat centered now on what's called augmented reality, which does try to do that, which uses the screen that you hold to add to the learning that you can do in the real world. But that's just very beginning and not at all really tested. A second thought about design is that we've been talking a lot all day today about sort of kids. And it's, of course, incredibly important, as we all know, that kids come from all kinds of differences that matter in terms of cultural, ethnic, racial, and so on backgrounds. So we have to think about differentiation and recognizing those differences and trying to take advantage of them in the design and stuff that we build. And that's this third point, is customizing possibilities. Just two more thoughts. I think that the best uses of media and technology, especially with very young children, is not by the child by herself or himself, but as a centering device to bring family, that might mean parents, it might mean siblings, it might mean grandparents, it might mean caretakers, together to interact around it. And that's this kind of pie-in-the-sky goal of joint media engagement. And we've heard a lot about dialogue and other kinds of things, learning that kids and adults can do together. Media can be a place for that too. Sometimes it's a little hard to picture if the medium that you have in mind is a small iPhone with a 2-inch screen. How do you actually put heads together over that? But I think people are working on that, and of course also working on collaborative devices where a kid can be holding a tablet and the parent can be, and they're still working in the same virtual space. And then the last point I want to make, I think, is that people who work in this field, including folks at the companies I mentioned, folks here in the department I teach in and so on, we're all really eager to design better things. And we'd like to learn from those of you who have so much more savvy and day-to-day experience. So the next time somebody contacts you in your daycare center or your school and says, we have something that we're developing that we think might have learning potential using media and technology, we'd love to be able to come in and show it to some of your kids and teachers and see what you think. I hope you'll think twice before you sort of take the easy way out and say, no, that's really too much trouble, it's too disruptive, it messes up our schedules. Instead, realize that you can be participants in developing better media and technology for kids. So thanks for your attention. Wayne? Sure.
Great.
Hi. Can you hear me? Are you awake? Okay. You'll have to pretend you're awake for the next 5 minutes. So, I have absolutely nothing to add to Michael and Joseph. I run an early education agency, and I'm the CEO of that agency, which means I know a little bit about just about everything and nothing deep in any area, and both of them know a lot about the subject. So I won't try, but I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing, both as it relates to technology and actually as it relates to some of your earlier topics and conversations that I came in halfway through the day and heard. So Noni mentioned that we launched this new center called the Nurtury Learning Lab. Go online and look it up. And we actually welcome researchers, and that's why it's called the Learning Lab. It's in the middle of a public housing development, the second largest public housing development in Boston. It's got about 900 families. It's the first Gold LEED certified building in public housing. And it's designed to do many things that you all have talked about throughout the day, which is to say, how can you have a high-quality classroom environment? And so we've tried to design those. We actually believe that if you want to work with kids 0 to 5, particularly with kids from poor families 0 to 5, we ought to sort of, and I realize this is a school of education, but distance ourselves just a little bit from this idea of education, because education has a tendency to separate us from families and communities. And so when you work with at least poor kids and poor families and poor communities, it's necessary to bridge that gap between the education and the family. In fact, I don't even see it really, but I realize when we train and when we teach, it's necessary. That is to say, all that is a long way of saying, so we've built in what we call a child-family community model. You call an intergenerational approach. And as it relates to the parent, there's sort of parent as first teacher kind of activities, parent as advocate. How do you develop an agency and navigate a complex world? And parent as breadwinner, which Tulsa folks talked about, which is how do you help parents make more money? Because the quickest way out of poverty is to earn more money. But in order to do as much as we could in this learning lab, we also built a media and technology room that we don't actually yet know what to do with. So those of you who have ideas, we've built a space to welcome you. We are doing a few things right now. One of them is we've launched a partnership with WGBH. Because I should pull back and say, I actually fit in one of the boxes that Michael talked about. I have blind embrace for technology. Because every rich person I know blindly embraces technology in a way that I only hear this sort of should we or shouldn't we when it applies to less well-off folks. So I am married to a woman who comes from a rich family. I wish they still were, but she comes from a rich family. But they still behave like rich people. And I have 4 nieces and nephews that I adore. And the youngest one is about 8 now, and the oldest one is about 19. And I've watched them all since the day they were born. And their lives have been saturated with technology. I mean, there is not a technology that they have not embraced. And they are the sharpest, the brightest kids, the most physically active kids, because technology is a part of their lives. It's not their life. No more than it is at the Nurtury Learning Lab. There's a technology room, but there's actually 3 outdoor classrooms, you might call them playgrounds, that are natural environments, because we actually think kids ought to run around as well. And the technology really is about learning, because quite frankly, that's what an early education is all about. There are times to do other things, it's just not in my classrooms. And so we A, embrace the technology, B, we ensure that it's about learning. And quite frankly, for us, it's actually an opportunity gap issue. Because if we don't find a way to help them get access to this technology, their resources, or resource constraint, I should say, will ensure that they don't get access to the technology, at least in the ways that would help narrow the opportunity gap. Now, as I said, I could be wrong about most of these things because I am not Michael and Joseph, and I don't know really what I'm talking about. These are really gut feelings, not really based on research or things of that nature. But I have studied those 4 kids. I have studied them, Paula, Juliet, Cooper, and Britt. As I adore them and I see them very, very often. I spend a lot of time with them. And they navigate these technologies. And later on, we go outside and we go searching for worms, and then we go fishing. Because as the adults, you got to make sure you make time for those other things. Otherwise, they will stay there. And honestly, I try not to play with them, with the technology with them, because I'll lose. They are so much better at this stuff than I ever will be. So I know I'm a dinosaur, but I embrace that they embrace the technology. A couple other thoughts. I should say also at the Nurtury Learning Lab, we have an art studio. We sent the executive director to Reggio Emilia. I really wanted to go myself, but as I said earlier, I'm the guy who knows a little bit about everything, and we needed somebody to learn a lot more. But art's important. So for us, it was never really about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. It was always a matter of, this is the universe we live in, and children ought to be exposed to as much of the wonderful things that this universe has to offer. And it's our job to sort of open them up to those opportunities. And the two-generational strategy, is particularly as it relates to pre-K, so I might be slightly off script. But the two-generational strategy, we've given actually a lot of thought about as it relates to pre-K. So I love pre-K. I'm glad it's here. Massachusetts just got a grant from the federal government, yay, to pilot pre-K. I'm fortunate enough that Nurtury is one of the organizations in Boston that will get to pilot it. We've been working with the Boston Public Schools and Jason Sachs on their efforts to expand pre-K into community-based programs. But we have a particular concern about the design for pre-K that I want to share with you, since I have this opportunity. And that is, education is failing significantly for poor families, particularly in inner cities. I only know inner cities because that's where I live and work. There may be other places that I just don't know them that well, but it's not working very well for them. And it turns out it doesn't matter how much money we spend on it, it doesn't work well. In Massachusetts, we had a massive education reform. We put $1 billion plus into education, and the outcomes for those kids never quite improved. We also noticed the same thing with health reform. Every kid in Massachusetts now has health care, and their health outcomes are no better. And so, but we asked ourselves when we were designing the Nurtury Learning Lab, and this is one of the things I want to say to you all as researchers and policymakers continue to design pre-K strategies across the country and around the world, is that really the moment you embed it in the educational framework, you begin to somehow create walls that just aren't really appropriate. Because it turns out kids come with their families. Every kid comes with a family. And families live in communities. And those communities are never neutral. They either help or they harm. And to the extent that we create complex systems that do not acknowledge those realities, and we create a world for those customers or clients that is based on the world that we prefer, as opposed to the world that the customer lives in, then we will, in fact, make the same mistakes in pre-K that we have made in K-12 for low-income children and families in certain communities. That is not true for every community, but it is true for those communities. So, I hope I had something useful to say. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Noni and Stephanie, to share my thoughts.
So, any questions for the panel? We've got Michael Rich's collaborators, Joe and Wayne. Questions about the media technology?
Lauren, Christelle, come on up. I think people might be fairly tired, actually.
Yeah, it's just one of those times a day.
Yeah.
It's also getting dark, as it does in Massachusetts at 4 o'clock.
Well, I want to say,
sure.
I want space in Wayne's, I want to use that space you described. We're going to come over with students and do some testing. Great.
Business cards, right? Okay. I lost my business cards. Anyway, sorry.
Question.
So I don't want to keep everybody, I'll be really quick, but so Wayne, what would you do differently? So if you were grounding pre-K and you don't want to ground it in education, so what would you do?
You start with family, and then you figure out how do you create a learning environment where kids will learn. So for example, someone said it earlier about if families work certain hours, then designing an educational system that doesn't fit those working hours, or in fact designing something that doesn't work for them. So I sort of start like most businesses would do. Start with making something that's successful for your customer, and recognize that your customer is not just the child. that perhaps the strategy you're focused on in educating in the classroom is about that kid, but really the family is the customer. And it helps to design with that in mind. So that's a general statement. But
you know, and if I could just add, I mean, that's in some sense what I was talking about also with media design to be engaging the whole family. You've all seen it, I hope, episodes of Sesame Street and know that there's jokes and talent and so on in there that's meant to attract the caretaker or parent audience, not just the 3-year-old. But that's just the beginning of how to sort of think deeply about the whole family, an extended family as the audience.
I'd also add, and one of the reasons we created the Learning Lab was the lab actually for us is our R&D. We figured that people in early education ought to have R&D centers as well. And so I think it helps to design places to practice things differently. So when we design the systems, carve out parts of the system to try ideas that you don't really know if it's going to work, because that's really how any other industry successfully thrives. And we have and I understand why with kids you don't want to experiment. There's an instinct to not experiment with young children. But innovation only comes from experimentation. And when we design something, we also we have to lie to people when we design things, right? There's a period of time where we just have to tell some things that we really don't know is true. And that's fine, right? Everybody does it. But the problem we often have is it's very easy to believe the lies we tell. And therefore we calcify and we don't allow ourselves the opportunity to try things differently. Because we've,
Melissa.
Hi, thanks. I would love for you all to talk for a moment about implications for teacher preparation around use of technology, communications with families, how we can help teachers think more deeply about the why behind anything that we're bringing into learning environments.
Do you have a chance to talk?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is this on? Yes. I think that's a really excellent question. There is actually more research than it seems that there would be on some of the more newly developed technologies like the tablets. There's a lot more than I thought there was. And there are actually some really good best practices for using those, for selecting for content. So, I mean, I can certainly, I don't have enough time to kind of go into all of them, but there, a lot of it's about content that's open-ended for kids to be creative with. You don't just want a game that has complete, parameters that don't really allow them to do anything except like push a few buttons and see the flower dance or whatever. You want it to be more open-ended and creative. You want opportunities for kids to engage with each other around them, around whatever technology that they're using. And you want, as with anything else in the classroom, you want specific learning goals that you are trying to achieve with that technology, instead of just sending the child off to use it by themselves. You want to have particular goals, and then you want to look for things that actually achieve those goals, and for the technology itself to be explicit about what it's trying to achieve with the child. There are a lot of there are guidelines like that that I haven't seen really compiled in one place, but they exist. We're pulling them together for the chapter that's coming out of this, but those are some.
Joe, did you want to add anything briefly?
Yeah, thank you. Just two quick things. One is that I mentioned in the end of my remarks Common Sense Media, which is a site and a service for parents and teachers. They are in the process of releasing teacher training modules that are essentially almost free, not quite, to help teachers learn how to take best advantage of media. But I think the real challenge lying behind your question is that media and technology, in fact, enable a whole different kind of learning and a whole different way of thinking about what pedagogy is for. And we're just beginning to sort of understand that, and there's a whole teacher force that is coming that I think is going to be more prepared to deal with it maybe than a lot of teachers who are in place now. I'll just leave it at that because I know we're...
Thank you all for joining us. Wayne, Joe, Lauren, Christelle, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Lauren.
Hey, Joe, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So we thought we'd just take 5 minutes and wrap up what's been a tremendous day. Thanks to all of you and our online viewers and discussants and plenary speakers and folks here in the audience.
And PPE.
And a big round of applause to Keith and his team and Stephen for a fabulous organization. And we should also thank our dean for sponsoring this event along with our funders. We tried out one thing, and it's not, we're not going to go through. Oh, it's not up there.
It's up there.
It's up there now. We tried out. We said at the beginning we were trying to link science to policy and practice, and we tried out thinking through some of the scientific insights that came up today as particularly sort of recent and or codified because of our new methodologies and research that's been coming out in the last 10 to 15 years. And then on the practice policy side, we tried out some of a strategy that we've been working on in our group across the two research groups here at the Ed School, which is, so what might the pitfall be if we're not careful about the kind of messaging that, for example, Catherine Snow reminded us of earlier, and or we think about implementation science or unintended consequences of policies that are initiated. And so on the left, you can see we just tried out some of those scientific insights around, for example, preventing and buffering risk. It's very clear that we can do that. On the practice policy side, the danger is that the conversation becomes about demographics, when in fact a lot of our data suggests these relationships exist universally. Maybe the magnitude is greater around certain groups than others, but a universal approach is certainly going to probably get us more purchase in the long run. Try out the second one.
We're going to just tag team because that's what we do. We both are in the conversation. So something we all know and we've heard today, and I would add about these messages, they're meta messages. They're meta scientific insights. And what's really interesting and what became very clear to us as the day unfolded was that these messages were in nearly every presentation, if not every one. So early childhood is a continuum. That's the scientific insight. That's not necessarily something that's new. We've known this for a long time. We are longitudinal researchers. We're developmentalists, so we really know this, and many of you know this, but we also know that the pitfall is that we become overly invested in certain periods, certain times, and certain outcomes, sometimes at the direct cost of another period, or maybe even another outcome. We heard that pretty clearly today.
That's right. Briefly, that, it's never been clearer around the need, therefore, for early identification and screening as sort of, central to our prevention and promotion efforts. On the other hand, the danger would be, and Beth would tell us, that if we conceptualize the screener as an assessment rather than a starting point within a universal strategy, then we're not going to get there. So in its worst form, our screeners become tools to find services for children with problems. In their genuine design, we're looking to flag everybody and anyone who may be at risk. And the other one that sort of is probably the most nebulous, but ran through the day if we really think about it, is this notion of neglect and exclusion happening along a continuum, which would be from subtle to not so subtle, from the sort of social exclusion that Deborah Phillips reminded us of this morning, the sort of social neglect moment to moment in the classroom or in the community, right through to the segregated setting with students with disabilities and or the pre-K expulsion, that we decide this is not somebody who can be part of our learning community. This is not a child fit for the learning community. If we wanted to be bold, we'd say, well, maybe the pitfall is that we might mandate these inclusive practices without addressing the root cause, i.e. we could mandate that we don't expel children from pre-K. The issue is what happens to that child within that setting now that they're there. We can mandate the inclusive practices and still not have the capacity for a genuinely inclusive learning environment.
So the final two, and this is something that ran through every presentation, I would say, adult development and well-being is, of course, inextricably linked to children's development and well-being. This is something that we know deeply, yet the pitfall, something that's also happened repeatedly, is that we direct most of our attention to children. And most of what we are seeing is attention directed to adults, to parents, and to adult caregivers, teachers, child care practitioners. It's just not intensive enough. It's not intentional, it's not intensive, and it's not often well designed. And then finally, this is kind of a big meta message, and this is clear to all of us, I think. Educators need professional tools and supports for improved teaching and learning. And the pitfall is that we provide tools and curricula without supports, or we provide supports without tools and curricula. So we haven't brought them together in all of our examples as dynamically as they really should be. So,
with that,
looking
we've got some
ahead.
work ahead that may involve you in going forward, but we did want to say that we really were conceiving of this as sort of the launch of this next generation of work that needs to happen in this new era of pre-K, that as we continue to expand and direct resources towards our youngest children, we also need to think through the improvement strategy, the implementation strategy, what kind of guidance, what kinds of efforts are needed out there at different levels. Most immediately, the sessions today will find their way into an edited volume, Harvard Education Press Fall 2015 release. We'll work on some translational briefs, not unlike the series that are in your folder, and stay tuned for some professional institutes that start to dig deep into these topics, which we thought of as today sort of a survey-like day, a kind of 360 on the most pressing issues, but certainly not the kind of institute that's going to change practice. So we think more about the professional side of this and what a series of interactive, more deeper learning experiences might look like. So we will certainly keep in touch with all of you. And with that, I want to say again, thank you, wonderful day, and lots more to come. And there are some of today's words. Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.